Hey everybody, welcome to the ProgCast. Gregg Bendian here, and very happy to be doing this particular episode because, well, there's a lot of history that we're going to cover today, as much as we can. I have with me composer, guitarist, keyboardist, vocalist, man about town, and one of my
Not
favorite
these
people.
days. A man right here.
We're making our own little towns here.
There you go.
Yeah, and here. So I'm just so happy to welcome my dear friend Mike Keneally.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's a real pleasure. I'm glad you proposed this. We go back a ways, so this is fun.
It's true, and I was trying to pinpoint the first time we met, and that was actually pretty easy for me because I've been producing the Bottom Line archive for about 12 years now, and I was able to, we recently assembled the complete gigography of the 30 years of the club.
Jeez.
And it's a lot of stuff, but
Yes.
but I was able to go to 2001, which is when we met, May 11th, at the Bottom Line. It was a double bill between my Mahavishnu Project and your Beer for Dolphins.
Yeah.
And
I remember. I have a very distinct memory of sitting out in the audience watching you guys play and being completely gobsmacked by how amazing you sounded.
Well, you're very kind. I mean, it certainly was a very early version of the band, and we were starting to get our thing going. And the Bottom Line was really our first home for that, because a lot of people didn't understand why anybody would want to try to cover Mahavishnu stuff. And Alan Pepper, of course, he got it right away because he had Mingus Dynasty and other jazz repertory ensembles. Right. So this was the album that you had out at the time, and this was the band that was playing.
Yeah, it was a large band to jam onto the Bottom Line stage, although not compared to an Ed Palermo gig, but still, that was an ambitious tour to bring such a sizable band around on the road. We were just throwing caution to the wind. It made no sense whatsoever from a budgetary standpoint, but we did it anyway.
And it was super cool.
It was a really good tour, and yeah, we had some good fortune with opening acts on some of the gigs, and that was one of the nights where it just felt really special. I just remember thinking, man, I'm glad this happened. This is a good time for the folks.
It was. I mean, it was a night of was very progressive music, instrumental and vocal and otherwise, and I was always impressed by your orchestration. So that was a moment where you hear a large ensemble, which you wouldn't hear very often, and I thought, oh, well, there's a good reason for this to be a larger ensemble. It's orchestral in a way.
Well, I really enjoyed the opportunity not only to play the arrangements that were on the dancing record, but to revisit older songs and expand the instrumentation for that lineup. And it was this year is the 20th anniversary of the dancing record. We toured for it in 2001, but it actually came out in 2000. So we were. I was checking out some live recordings of BFD from that era, from 2001, just for maybe possible release later on as some kind of a dancing 20th anniversary thing. Yeah, I found some recordings and had completely forgotten what the arrangements of the earlier material sounded like. So it's like, wow, this is actually something I spent time on, working out these orchestrations for some of the older tunes, and it was fun to hear. There were obviously, because of the instrumentation there were arrangements that were unique to that tour. So it was an interesting time.
So you have good live recordings of that tour?
there's several really nice recordings. I think Lina's in Lexington, Kentucky, you know, because we weren't really trying to record professionally, but every once in a while you'd strike gold, and you just find it might even be an audience recording or some kind of a matrix where just everything comes together. It's just the right vibe, the right sound, and the band is in a good space performance-wise. Every room has its own character, and sometimes that character translates to recordings better than others. And I found that one that I really thought had a good groove to it. So we might do something with that.
I remember. Go ahead.
I would love to have the ability, you know, like a Neil Young archive type website where we could just, you know, as soon as we find something, we just put it up, you know.
Yeah, I recently started putting all my archive together, not putting it up, but just knowing where my stuff was. And it's a lot of stuff. And so, you know, for me, it's good to have it. I don't know what I'm ultimately going to do with it at all. Certainly not what Neil Young has done.
Well, I've started cataloging in a real haphazard way because there's just no time. All these CDs that I have, I mean, because since I guess since around 95 or so is when because we started Keneally.com in 94. You know, 26 years now that Keneally.com has been up, and one of the first things we did was to say, hey, if you want to record these shows, it's cool with us. You know, get us a copy. So what that meant in those days was literally mailing me a CD. So I ended up with a lot of these, and you know, of course, that started to tail off around the mid-aughts or so, when people stopped, you know, distributing audio via disc so much and just, you know, sending files around. But for that, there's about 10 years or so there where I was just like getting a lot of CDs, and it's boxes and boxes and boxes, and they're not in any kind of, you know, sensible order. So I started doing that. I haven't done the actual transferring of all that audio to a hard drive. Some of it I have, but that's obviously an endless task time-wise. But I thought at least I want to get a database of what I've got, and that way it's searchable, and I can say, well, what I would really like to archive this thing, you know, do the transfer, have the digital files, and I will have a database where I can go and find that thing, or even just like a series of shows. This era I'm interested in getting to know better. So I'm slowly making progress there, but there's a lot of music that I'm working on these days, and it really eats into the time to do stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's a whole other project.
Yeah.
But you were one of the first people that I knew of, besides the Grateful Dead, but that was encouraging people to record the live shows. And I really took to that idea, and I did the same thing. If people wanted to record, as long as they got us a copy, it was a way of making sure that you'd have, you know, more coverage, more documentation of a tour when you weren't necessarily set up to do it yourself.
Yeah, it's absolutely win-win, and I think it was proven pretty early on that I really don't think that there's a, you know, obviously Frank was incensed by bootlegging, and in that case it's understandable because they were you know, people were recording his shows, pressing them onto vinyl and selling them, and obviously he was not thrilled about that. But in terms of just the thing of trading recordings amongst a fan base, I could only see that as a net benefit, because it spreads. You run the danger, depending on how much of a control freak you are, of having a show that is maybe not up to your what your hoped for standards are, be the show that everybody trades, and that's it. And so there's one potential downside, is that maybe you have an off night and that show makes the rounds. But, you know, if you're going to have off nights, then if you're scared of having off nights, you better just stay home, because there's off nights are going to happen. And certainly the Grateful Dead trading community are very peaceful about the idea that some nights are going to be stronger than others, and that's part of the journey, you know. And it's even fun to trace a series of shows and see, maybe they were at this venue for 4 nights. The first night was on fire. Second night started to get a little shabby. Third night is trash, and then the fourth night is amazing, you know. So that's its own kind of fun, and having that sort of a relationship with a band and just sort of tracing the journey that way, I think enriches the experience for the listener, and it's free advertising for the artist. So I was like all about it.
Yeah, I thought if the super fans were enjoying that was a good thing. And I also thought, like you, that, you know, it's a form of promotion for the music. And those are the fans that are going to buy your stuff anyway.
Exactly, because they're 2 distinctly different animals, right? You know, you craft a studio album in a completely different way than a show which just happens. And then the other thing that happens is that, yeah, you might have off nights, but there's also times on the stage where all of a sudden you lock into a groove and you play in such a way that you could rarely, if ever, manage in the studio. And I know that as a guitar player, I've heard things on other people's recordings of my band that I couldn't believe I had done. You know, it's like I've learned things about myself from hearing audience recordings of the band, stuff that I never approached in the studio. So that's a benefit for me, that work, that if it weren't for somebody else taking an interest in distributing that way, that audio wouldn't be out in the world. So
yeah, and you touch on a technique that I used probably all the way back to high school, which is that if you record your shows and you listen to them critically, you can tell what worked and what didn't, and what you need to work on, and really what's stable and what's shaky.
Right. Which was real instructive for me, because when you're, you know, especially early on, when you're in performance head and you're trying to take care of business in a variety of ways, and it's difficult to have, or at least initially it's difficult to have the overall sound captured in your awareness at the same time that you're performing. That's something that takes a while to do. To be able to what I refer to it now is being simultaneously in performer head and producer head. You know, it's like nowadays when I'm playing, after having done it for so long, I can assess the overall sound and figure out what I need to do, whether it's in my own performance or some subtle thing that affects the rest of the band's performance, to bring things a little more into alignment. And especially vocally, that was something that I was not in touch with in the earlier performances. If you listen to some of the stuff in the 90s, I'm just, you know, I'm going for broke all the time, and probably focusing a little more on playing than I was on singing, and that's a dangerous choice to make, because when you open your mouth next to a microphone, people expect to hear some reasonably okay singing. And sometimes I would just be yowling and it wouldn't, you know, be anywhere near in tune and stuff. And in my head, I was probably thinking, well, I'm doing this stuff and I'm singing at the same time, so the overall effect must be effective. But the reality is, nobody occupies your own person while you're doing this stuff. And even if you might think, well, they'll cut me a break because I have to play this and sing it at the same time. The reality is, no, it's just sound. People respond to sound, and so I got a lot more serious about singing as a result of hearing some recordings where it just wasn't happening. And some nights you're battling elements beyond your control with monitors and whatnot. You literally can't hear yourself singing, and you realize after an hour of beating your head against the wall at sound check, because, you know, at the budgetary level that we were touring, you are at the mercy of every club's monitor system. It's always different, and you just have to hope for the best. And sometimes the best is not that great in terms of intonation, and you just you go, oh well, I hope nobody hears that one. But you know, I think I've upped my game somewhat vocally as a result of you know, learning some hard lessons that way.
Well, I always say to myself and to my students, you have to be your own biggest fan and your own harshest critic.
I guess it does require a little bit of both. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point.
So I was thinking about that night at the Bottom Line, and I'm not recalling that we had much time to chat, but I know that we decided right away we were going to stay in touch. And the thing that sticks out to me about the first year of us knowing each other was that we both released albums that we exchanged with each other that I think have remained really kind of classic Bendian or Keneally discs, and that's these two.
Yes, certainly. I mean, as much as I dug hearing you guys play, the Mahavishnu stuff that night, I felt like I really understood you when I remember specifically driving around listening to the Interzone album in the car, and just I mean, obviously the Jack Kirby aspect of it was real intriguing, and that also like gave me a more of a window into who you are. But then I was just like, holy jeez, this guy is a composer and a player, and and I dug the fact that you were playing the mallet instruments as well, and it gave me a lot of insight. So yeah, and then Wood and Smoke obviously was a real different album for me. It's the most acoustic album I've done, and the most sort of like tranquil album I've done, and so that was kind of a departure. But I guess that was a good year for both of us. Yeah.
It was. And I remember
2001 was a good year for a while.
Yeah, right. Well, and also my son Elias was born in 2001. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking that it was important for me to have the Kirby out in 2001 because he had a connection to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which he was the first person to do a graphic novel interpretation of it.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
well, that was always and remains my favorite film. And
is that right?
Yeah, and that was an important year for me. And in fact, there's a song on Wood and Smoke called 2001, and it did feel like it was an important time. And then it took a turn none of us expected. Yeah,
it did feel, well, of course, and it was an important year for both good and bad reasons. But yeah, I remember being on the road doing the Requiem for Jack Kirby tour with Nels and Alex Cline, and the East Coast version was with Kermit Driscoll on basses, and then the West Coast leg was with Joel Hamilton, the bassist from the album. And I remember that we were playing the Knitting Factory, I think at the beginning of the tour, and it was 5 days after 9/11. And we had decided, and around that time, it was interesting too, because we were concerned that this might not be an isolated incident. So we went through police cordons that blocked off the whole Wall Street area where the Knitting Factory was located. And, we were having our vehicles searched, and we were going to do load in and do sound check. And the whole time we're thinking, like, is there going to be another shoe that's going to fall here? What's going on? And I remember very graphically the smell of the burning still going on a few days later when we were playing there. But Wood and Smoke has remained an important record for me in my Keneally fandom. And I remember really being attracted to the fact that it was acoustic, because I happen to know that a lot of electric guitarists don't play that well on acoustic, or it's certainly it's a different chore, right?
Sure.
But you had obviously committed so heavily to the beautiful sound of the acoustic instruments. And one piece in particular, I think I've mentioned this to you, but I don't mind telling people this, is Hello, the opening track on Wood and Smoke. I have something of a ritual with Hello, which is, really? Do you remember, I've done it a few times, but every time I land at LAX and I get my rental car, I make sure it has a CD player, which is harder to do now.
Yeah.
But the first thing that I listen to when I get to LA is Hello.
Oh.
And a few times I called you and I said, Mike, I just landed and I'm listening to Hello.
I love that as a ritual. That's great. I wish everyone had that ritual.
So where does
that song is actually a ritual for me too, because usually if I play that song live, it's because I'm trying to get centered. I'm trying to calm myself. I need to be in a real calm place in order to execute that song properly. So I use it that way.
And I had the great pleasure of performing it with you, an arrangement that we came up with you, me, and Doug Lunn.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually video of this on YouTube if folks are interested. Playing it in New York at Iridium. Yeah, so it was very cool because the piece doesn't really have percussion on it. It has vibraphone on it, but
yeah, I think there might be the shakers on it, or there was one thing that I used for percussion in the studio on several of the songs was a tree. That was in the studio, so we close mic'd the tree and on a couple of the tunes. I can't remember whether that's on that song or not, but there's some unusual approaches to percussion on the album.
Well, so there's plenty of wood on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of literal wood on that record, although that was a fake tree.
And it was such a pleasure to play that piece too, because you let me just come up with my own arrangement for it, and I came up with a bunch of junk percussion things and a glockenspiel part, and even a little like China cymbal with a mallet. So that was sort of also the beginning of us playing together in a live setting and playing with the great bass player, our friend, the late Doug Lunn.
Yeah. Who's Zon headstock you can see poking up next to Scambot back there. That's Doug's fretless bass, which Vita and Donnie gave to me for safekeeping. I'm caretaking Doug's fretless, and yeah, we did a lot of performing, and we did a trio tour with him fairly close to the end of Doug's life, and I'm so grateful now that we had that opportunity to do so much playing with him, because there are very, very few people in my life that had the impact on me that Doug did from a musical standpoint, from a personal standpoint. He was a teacher to me in a lot of ways. When I first started recording and playing with him in the early 90s, he opened my eyes to so much. I mean, I called myself a fan of a lot of different kinds of music, but he encouraged me to go deeper, into I had a bunch of Miles Davis records, but it's almost like they were totems rather than something I truly understood, and just through literal conversations and also just from absorbing his knowledge from playing with him. In the run up to the Hat album, we did hours and hours of rehearsal in Toss's garage, just running those tunes, but also just improvising. And I feel like I learned more about music from just being in the room with Doug while he was playing than that was as significant and catalyzing a musical experience and educational experience as anything. And he's just so smart and funny and amazing and present. Just an incredible guy.
Well, incredible, and one of the smartest people I've had the pleasure of knowing. But
yeah.
Philosophical and as well as knowledgeable, and in a way, the ideal bass player for me and for the kind of music that I want to make, because you could go anywhere you wanted. Apart from him not really playing that much acoustic, although we did have acoustic bass guitar on our last few shows with him. But any style, any rhythmic component, any, you know, type of improvisation, he wasn't a big reader. You know, obviously he had some trouble with his eyesight, but his memorization skills were ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's such a big part, too, of a guy that's committed to the gig, no matter how complicated the stuff is. Just let him know in enough advance, and he'll show up maybe more prepared than you because you were trying to read some of the stuff, and he had already committed it to memory.
Exactly. Yeah, he definitely preferred to have the stuff internalized that way, because that's when the magic comes out, right? When you don't have to think about that aspect. And yeah, and I did some of the weird stuff that I asked him to play on Hat and Boil at Dustback. I definitely, you know, stuff like Ugly Town and Spoon Guy that needed to be charted out. But, you know, by the time he got those notes internalized, he brought those pieces to, you know, a whole other place than I would even imagine they could go, just because of the strength of his voice as a musician. And then on Dustback, he you know, just contributed such beautiful sort of extemporaneous moments, like the intro to a song called Glow, which Doug just owns with the fretless, and then there's a guitar solo called Bullies that is just like, it's only one chord throughout the whole thing, but the way he just moves through it like some sort of ancient beast is just is so powerful, you know, because one note coming from Doug could mean more than you know, one note coming from anyone else, and yeah, he was just phenomenal, incredible.
And we had the pleasure. Sorry.
It was so much fun to play over, and the fact that it was fretless too just meant that every note was more fluid, and it seemed to like give you more possibilities as a result. As an improviser, I felt like the sky was the limit when playing over Doug. He hit that balance between you know, providing all the actual solid information that you need, but also suggesting cosmic possibilities at the same time. You know, it was concrete and interstellar at the same time.
Yeah, for me, the best bass players are ones that are simultaneously foundational, but also hint at leading somewhere else or offer you the possibilities of going somewhere else than just being sort of a backdrop.
Yeah. And he definitely did that, man. He opened my eyes and ears much wider than they had been previously. Yeah,
and a great hang on the road. We had great discussions.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it was pure pleasure. Just the three of us traveling around, marauding.
Yeah. And we were lucky enough to be able to record with him 3 tracks for your album Scambot 2.
Yes, which I love the space those songs occupy. I have real fondness for all of that stuff, which are Clipper, Pretzel, and Scores of People, and they're all real important songs on that album. And that's another thing that I'm real grateful that we had the opportunity to do, because that was after the tour. If I remember correctly, right? That was after the tour we did those recordings, or was it before?
I can't remember if we had reconvened after the tour in your part of the world to do a week of shows and recording. I think that's what we were doing.
Oh, that's what it was. Yes, exactly. We played at Dizzy's amongst the Kawasaki's, and we played at Alva's, and then we made those recordings.
And did we also play at the Baked Potato?
And we had a Baked Potato gig too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Clipper is just this weird song, man, and I really loved what you gave that song, and also Scores of People percussively. There's so much information in those percussion tracks, and those are songs that could probably be remixed a million different ways. And then Pretzel, which is just like the full-on Gentle Giant sort of tribute song, with me attempting to sound like Carrie Minier vocal. I love the way both you guys feel on that song. It's just this gorgeous little, like a cameo, or the cameo in the little jewelry sense. I just dig it. Both you guys are kings on that record.
It was such a treat because, well, first of all, we're all Gentle Giant fans, and and to be able to commit some of that to the recording was nice. And then, it's always a pleasure for me when somebody says to me, "This section, do whatever you want." And you tend to say that a lot with me, which is nice. But I remember the whole coda of Scores of People, and I was doing take after take of glockenspiel colors and improvisations, and you said, "Do another one. Do another one." Keep going.
And then and in the final mix, it's I'm weaving in and out of your takes. I basically made a thing utilizing various of your phrases and the way they all just sort of melt in and out of each other, and that was so much fun. I love that process so much. It's there's just there's a lot going on there in a very sort of understated way, because that coda of Scores of People is this kind of placid, contemplative piece that I actually wrote in high school. That coda of Scores of People is a real old thing, and then returned to it 40 years later for Scambot. So that already there was elements of like nostalgia and a lot of stuff emotionally that's bound up in that Scores of People coda, and Doug is just like playing the melody basically on double tracked fretlesses. It's just an amazing sound, and then you just like going off in all the different percussive effects. I'm really grateful that piece exists.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It's still one of my favorite things that I've done, where I was able to get into bowing cymbals and things like that, and you were fine with that, and you noticed when my cymbal pitches were in the chord that they were played over. So you know, it's a pleasure to do it for another composer and an arranger, because that's what you did. Then you went in and arranged all that stuff and made it into a really nice ensemble. But in fact, it was just sort of layering initially. If everything had been left up the whole time, there would have been like 7 glockenspiels at the same time.
It would have been, it's still listenable, you know, certainly, but a lot more chaotic. The fun is like, you know, finding, and then when you find the things that feel like they belong there, the sense is that, well, this is cosmically ordained, right? Because, you know, you find the thing that just goes so perfectly with this other phrase that was done on another take 2 takes later, but the way they mesh is just so perfect. It's that stuff is endlessly fascinating, because, you know, when you're playing extemporaneously like that, even 2 completely different takes, they're obviously coming from the same consciousness, from the same energy, or, you know, not different energy, but emanating from the same person. So there are going to be some, you know, interesting resonances between different improvised takes, and finding out how those things Lego together is real fun.
Yeah, it's worked out really well that way. And I guess I never had the chance to ask you this being on Scambot 2, but can you give me the short version of what the Scambot concept is? Because I'm not sure that I'm clear about it.
Well, Scambot is a guy who is just sort of a grumpy guy who spends too much time on internet message boards, you know, having arguments and stuff like that. So he's not particularly happy, and he's is judged to be a particularly susceptible test subject for this guy named Boleus Ofunji, who has developed abilities to manipulate people's consciousness. So he gets into Scambot's consciousness and starts controlling him, and it leads to a whole bunch of bizarreness. The plot line would take way too long, and it's been so long since I even thought about it that there are many aspects to the storyline that I can't even like recite for you right now. But the plot line of Scambot was really just a device to get me inspired to come up with more and more music, you know, because I would come up with an idea for the plot that would inspire a song, and then that song would inspire something which would then show me what the way forward in the plot was. And so the music and the lyric, the plot, were all just sort of like kicking each other down the field, you know, towards the finish line. But essentially it has to do with you know, God is a character in it as well, and God is a committee of enlightened beings who work together, and they have some impact on the story. Although by the end of the story, God is also like overworked and tired and looking for a break, and humankind allows God to be set free. It's you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on.
Is it your
turns it.
Is it your only concept album?
It is. It is. And there's still a third part which will come out at some point that I have not started working on it yet, other than conceptually. But I have some idea of how that record will feel, and I have some idea of how it's going to sit in terms of the plot line. Because by the end of Scambot 2, everyone has the option to go to this sort of a parallel reality, another phase of existence, but they are free to go back and forth from life on Earth to life in this other more peaceful and sort of less anxiety ridden phase of existence. even in there, stuff can get a little wacky. So that's I think where the next installment of Scambot will be taking place, in this sort of alternate land. But you know, it's just me having a good time.
Yeah, but it struck me that the relationship of Scambot and his nemesis, I guess, it just reminded me vaguely of Alban Berg's opera Wozzeck. Do you know Wozzeck?
I do, although I've never experienced it from start to finish, and any similarities were coincidental.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the Ofunji because of it's possible to be more sympathetic to Ofunji during the course of Scambot 2, because you realize that he's not in control of himself either. There's somebody else pulling his strings.
Mm. Is that Scambot behind you?
It is, yeah. And the Scambot just showed up in my sketchbook one day while I was working on Wood and Smoke. I was doing a lot of drawing and just sort of like working through ideas that way, and in written and drawn form. And this comic strip called Scambot just popped out one day with that little character, and there was just something about him that got me kind of obsessed, and I kept returning to it, and I didn't know what he was. It was just a complete stream of consciousness, absurd thing. But I kept thinking, this has legs. This is leading me somewhere, and eventually it became an obsession, and I had to do those records.
But he does look like an ornery character.
He is. He's a little complainer. He, like a lot of people, feel like it's a good use of their time to take on other people in comment sections and mess boards and stuff, and make a nuisance of himself there, and he eventually cures himself of that, though.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like you were onto the whole idea of trolling very early on in internet life.
Well, it struck me, well, and I guess it stands to reason. Like it's nobody who's creating stuff wants it to be dismissed summarily, and it's, you know, constructive criticism is one thing. YouTube comment sections are something entirely different, and so it's easy to get, you know, and so much of the stuff in Scambot and so much of Scambot himself is just a reflection of things I was thinking. There's a song on the first Scambot called Cat Brand Sandwich, which is just like him going off about, you know, how you hear this thing, how to an opinion, and it's like, oh no, they're not. You know, it's like you must have, you know, a certain grounding in the subject before you just go off and present your half-formed opinion to the world as though it's some kind of wisdom. And you know, and I took that to absurd extremes in Cat Brand Sandwich, but that was, you know, a genuine frustrated thing that I was feeling as I was, you know, seeing people just kind of go off a bit thoughtlessly on the internet about stuff, and I guess the initial response to that was to take great umbrage, and you know, and so you finally realize, just don't read that stuff. You know, you're better off just, you know, not bringing that into your life. And then, you know, it's like you realize, well, if you're gonna put yourself in the position to read those things, you really do have to take the bad with the good, and life really is a mixture of both. If you expect all your feedback to be positive, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You're gonna just be spoiled, basically, and that's not good. So I think I know I'm a lot more peaceful about it now, and it's a good thing, because, you there's no lack of people making their opinions known, whether it's whether they're well researched or not. I do think it's important to not imbue that stuff with any more significance than it actually has.
Yeah, we learned that lesson as creators.
Yeah.
But that's where being your own biggest fan comes in, I think.
Well, there are times where you definitely have to get, you got to root for the home team. Yeah.
Mike, we're both, I think, such visually interested people. I know that you create through painting, through drawing. I have a long history of drawing as well, particularly as a young person. And I happen to have the experience where listening to music or even imagining music, I have a very visual reaction in my imagination. Does that happen for you?
I don't know that it does as much. I'm not, synesthetic to that degree. Like sometimes I'll talk to Andy Partridge, and he's really that. I almost think that he sees more than he hears when he listens to music. And I don't know. I just find the sound in and of itself to be so endlessly fascinating and absorbing that I don't. I mean, if I'm asked to do so, I can translate a song into the way it makes me feel, via a drawing or something like that. But it doesn't happen unprompted. If I'm listening to music and I'm like really, really deep into it, I'm in that sound, or I'm like literally in the studio. That's what I find happening most often. If there's a visual corollary, when I'm listening to music, I find that I'm actually putting myself in the place where the music was made.
Oh, wow.
I feel that I can understand more about what's happening if I imagine that I'm in the studio while the thing is being recorded, and even like the conditions and what they were hearing in their headphones while they were tracking, and how much of it was done simultaneously as opposed to how much was overdubbed later, and so I kind of run these different scenarios through my head as I'm listening, and into live recordings as well. What does this room feel like? What was the sound like on stage? And some recordings lend themselves to that more than others. When I listen to Miles live at the Plug Nickel, I can smell that beer. I can I see the waitress walking around the room. It's like it's real. It feels like real life in the present when I listen to that, even though it's 55 years ago now. So I think because I so strongly feel like I'm in that moment when I'm listening to the music, that I don't get the colors or abstract visuals or something as much.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Plug Nickel. When I was doing the Sign of Four project with Pat Metheny and Derek Bailey, Pat and I were mixing it, and we were trying to decide how it was going to start. And his model for a live album was Plug Nickel.
That's good to know.
And I remember he told me and the recording and the mix engineer, no, the reference, what we're trying to reference here is the way Live at the Plug Nickel comes across with this improvised noise that we were doing. He somehow made that connection to Plug Nickel, and it's always stuck with me.
It's funny because it could be anything. It could be just like the way one guitar string sounded on one thing that just like puts you there, and it's those type of connections can be real arcane, and it can be something that only the artist feels, and they can barely explain it or describe it. But it still leads you somewhere, and wherever it leads you, hopefully it's where you wanted it to go. There are so many different impulses and forms of input that lead to a finished piece of work, and it can seem real abstract and almost nonsensical to somebody else, but it's like, well, this is what it took for me to get there.
Well, and also I find that in producing and even in recording, having a sort of lexicon of classic recordings that you could just say to somebody, well, you know, the bass sound on Nefertiti, you know, or do you know the
Right.
drum sound on English Settlement? And that becomes a kind of vocabulary, a sonic vocabulary that we can use. And I know that, you know, just for instance, that when we were recording with Doug for Scambot, and I'd never seen a bass player double track his bass parts before, you know, and he said, well, you know, I got that from Colin Moulding, and that idea of doing fretted parts doubled by fretless and vice versa.
Right. That's interesting because there's some of that on Boil That Dust Back, and at that point he told me that was a Mick Karn approach
As well, yes.
Yeah, and that was the one that really stuck with me. But it's also interesting because a few weeks ago I was talking to Andy because he has been doing more recording. And he feels that, you know, after all these years, because, you know, he's been recording in his shed in Swindon for years and years and years, but he feels like just in the last 10 years or so that his engineering chops have gotten to a point where he's starting to accrue a kind of a textbook of knowledge that he wanted to impart to me. He said, so you're doing a lot of recording. I would love to impart some of these engineering tips. And I, you know, we ended up having like 4 hours of conversations, and he sent me emails, and I created a document, and I have, like, you know, this fairly long list of tips when I'm ready to finally go in and mix this stuff that I'm working on for my next album. Because, you know, since the pandemic, I've been home recording. I've done home recording in the past, but was never too concerned about getting it too slick. And there's like on Scambout 1 and 2, there are some stuff that I recorded at home, but then would bring to Mike Harris at Scott Chatfield's house, where we recorded all that stuff, Chatfield Manor, and Mike Harris would do the final mix and polish it off. And I'm trying to you know, figure out how to do more of that mixing on my own, and, you know, establish, because I am getting a sound here with the stuff that I'm doing, but it's still, you know, like I sent a real rough mix of the song that I was working on to Devin Townsend, and he said, I really like the sound you're getting. It's this real intimate, interesting thing that I dig. And I like that, you know. I like the first McCartney album. I like the sound that you get from a kind of a homespun, you know, one guy approach. But with this particular song, which just the working title has been The Last Song on the Album, and I recorded it all myself, with the exception of the drums, which were recorded by Malcolm Mortimer. And so I've you know, and he sent me various takes. So, you know, Scores of People style, I've been going through his various takes and finding the bits that really work for me in each section of the song, and weaving the different takes together. And you know, trying to work out what my engineering approach is going to be. And Andy not only did he give me all these you know, sort of tricks.
Can you share a couple?
Where's my book? Well, the one big one, which is like a real simple thing that you know, this it shouldn't feel as sort of revelatory as it is, but he just said, no matter what you do, anytime you make any kind of a move, any kind of a step, make the move, listen to it, and ask yourself, is it better or worse? And that's like the simplest thing that you would think, well, we already know that instinctively, but the reality of it is that no, we maybe don't take the time to ask ourselves this very simple question, and we get caught up in technological things, or like, you know, it's supposed to be better if we do this, you know, and you might convince yourself, like a lot of us did in the 80s with the onslaught of digital audio and CDs. Well, clearly this is better. then you look back and you think we were all fucking hypnotized to these were in any way better than the sonics of the 70s, you know. Are you still there?
I am. You froze for a minute, but
okay. Anyway, it is possible to go into a kind of a mental paralysis when working with sound, and so it's real valuable to just, you know, take a step back, take that breath, and go, is this better or worse? The simplest question and the most important question you could ask.
and I think both you and Andy would have fun knowing that I was taught that in the 80s by Cecil Taylor.
Oh,
and I still say this, and he was talking about, particularly about the new traditionalism that had emerged in jazz around that time. And he brought up the topic of refinement, or refining something, or perfecting something. And so I say this in the studio a lot, and I learned it from Cecil, but it's the same type of thing. He always says, when you do that, what is gained, what is lost?
Mm-hmm. That's actually, it's similar but different, and that is another extremely valuable question, because inevitably anything that you change means that something else is reduced. So that's why Cecil Taylor and Andy Partridge make the big bucks.
Yeah, you got it.
But then there was any number of more specific, you know, just like different, you know, he said get span, which is a frequency analyzing software, and then he said if you want to know how to mix hard guitar rock, listen to Pump by Aerosmith, which, you know, I was like, wow, there's Andy Partridge recommending Pump. And he said, you know, that album, Nevermind by Nirvana, obviously these are, you know, when you think of those albums, you think of them as and I was like, I realized, yes, it's true. I think of those albums as sounding kind of perfect. And he said, if you analyze the frequencies there, you'll see that it's just like flat across. There's no spikes or dips. It's just like everything is covered, and it results in this really pleasurable, smooth listening experience. So he's just like, analyze the frequencies of your favorite albums with this span software, and then when you're mixing a song that's in that same kind of genre, see what you can do with your EQ and effects. And he recommended a bunch of specific plugins and stuff to, you know, sort of get it in that same range. And, you know, and you'll find that it's a much more pleasurable thing. He said, you know, split your bass signal, you know, copy your bass signal, put it on a separate track, emphasize these frequencies on one of the tracks and these frequencies on the other. And, you know, just like, yeah, these are all great ideas.
I love it. I mean, it's just another reason to think Andy Partridge is so fucking brilliant.
This is true. This is true.
You know, leave him alone with a concept for a while, and this is what you get.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's, writing lyrics with him for Wingbeat Fantastic was so humbling in a way, because it's like, okay, the song Wingbeat Fantastic, it was determined early on that the sort of unifying concept to that song was bird. You know, it's about, and Andy's written about birds in the past. Yeah. But if you give him a concept, it could be bird, it could be football, it could be chair, whatever. He's going to wring every ounce of nutrition out of that concept. You know, ants, skeletons. He will just brilliantly and in a way that feels effortless but isn't. You know, just like take this beautiful, writerly, poetic, humorous, buoyant, and sonically pleasing, because, you know, all the words, you know, sound good as they're coming out, which is as important as the meaning when you're singing stuff. It's gotta sound like those words belong coming out of your mouth. And like he completely wrote all the lyrics to the song I'm Raining Here Inside, with the exception of the word needle. There's the part that goes, perhaps we'll just get stuck again like a needle on your favorite track. On his original lyrics, he'd written stylus. And I just found that the word stylus sounded weird coming out of my mouth. And because when he wrote those words, it didn't have music yet. And that was an interesting story too. But it just goes to show sometimes you have to come at things from a distant place, because he had the lyrics to I'm Raining Here Inside in a book for ages and was unable to set any kind of music to it. He's like, no matter what I do with these words, I can't figure out where it belongs musically. And I just looked at them, and the song screamed at me off the page. And I sat at the piano and I wrote the chord progression within 5 minutes that ended up on the record. And I was like, how could it be anything but this? Clearly, this is how this song goes, you know. But songs like that sometimes need two people to happen.
I love that song, and we had the pleasure of touring that song and playing it every night.
That song is a struggle to play live. It's a delicate thing, all the elements in that song. It was always really hard for me to feel satisfied.
Well, you're doing everything at once live.
But
and singing.
That's right. Oh, that's right. It's, you know, it's like it's unless I spend a long time prepping, there's always going to be that you know, that feeling of, you know, just thinking too much when that's going on. And of course the budget is never there for endless amounts of rehearsal. And I was thinking about, you know, just the Zappa thing. We rehearsed for 4 months for the '88 tour, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, you know, of course Frank lost money on the road because all we did was rehearse. That was a 4-month tour. We rehearsed for 4 months leading up to it.
Yeah.
Most circumstances don't allow for things like that to happen, you know, and often in my own ensembles, the person who's had the least amount of time to practice this stuff is me. And with some things you can get lucky, but with something like Raining Here, if I just had like one day to do nothing but that, I would have felt more confident about bringing it off live. But as it is, there's certain songs that just like send a chill up my spine when I imagine trying to play them. And there are times I've done shows and people have requested that song, and I'm just like, sorry, you know, someday I'll take that day and spend it doing nothing but practicing that song to perform, and then I'll be good to go.
It's a fun song to play. People really do love it, and there's a good version of us playing it on the NJ Prog House video, which is also on YouTube.
I'll have to check it out and see if I approve of my own statement.
I think you nailed it. You know, it's so interesting that the process that you had with Andy Partridge, and you know, we're both huge XTC and Partridge fans, and the notion of lyric writing, which is something that I really picked up from Andy, is unity of language. So that if you are going to be talking about seagulls screaming, then you have setting a scene where all of the imagery will refer back to that central concept of the guy being really scared to kiss this girl. Mm-hmm. You know, in that position that we've been in at various times in our lives.
Yeah. But everything that's happening in that setting is somehow, you know, making fun of this guy for being unable to act. Yeah.
Right.
And again, the just amazing use of word. The sea looks warship gray. It whispers fool, then slides away. You know, it's
the semaphore of the umbrellas and chairs. You know, sending
all going kisser. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I guess Raining Here Inside sort of put me in the mind of that, where clearly all of the word choices are going to reflect internally, which is interesting too, because, you know, I'm influenced a lot by film, and I learned the concept of making choices that reflect the composition internally from the filmmaker David Cronenberg.
Okay.
And I went to a lecture when his version of Naked Lunch came out. Right. And of course the music is by Howard Shore and Ornette Coleman. So that was very cool, just being there for that. But he talked about, you know, naming drugs something other than what would be a commonly known street name, because it would take you outside of that reality that he had formed. So the drug name would have been something that would only reflect inside the world he was making.
Right.
So it's a word choice thing again. But that idea of keeping someone in focused in that reality for the duration of that experience.
Which is a thing that I sometimes struggle with, because I'm just as sort of enchanted by, and I'm sure my career has been poisoned by this to any number of degrees, but by the idea of breaking the spell, you know, and I think that comes from Monty Python or something, or where, you know, you establish a reality and then just trash it. And I think, you know, Frank also enjoyed that, you know, the idea of interruption, and it's not about, you know, it's the exact opposite of lulling the listener or the watcher into anything. It's a constant. Oh, is that what you think? No, you know, let's move that aside. This is what's happening now. Oh, you're comfortable now? No, now what's this? And that was always thrilling to me, because it was so, you know, it was, at the time anyway, it was unconventional, and it was subversive and kind of perverse.
But can I jump in and say that, being a film buff as Frank was, that's also very filmic, and the idea of jumping and being able to jump to the next thing and juxtapose scenes or images or atmospheres. And I think that Frank was such a filmic composer, particularly when you look at things like Gregory Peccary, but just that idea of what you're saying, interruption. And it's like that versus the meditative thing, where you could have that, you know, that piece that's just going to take you on a journey that is not going to jar you. But I think of things like Morton Feldman's music, where it's just kind of environmental. So, but these are all just strategies, and they're all interesting. And for composers, you want a good palette of options, you know?
Yeah, you want access to all of it. And I think, you know, as time has gone on, I have embraced more of the meditative, but the other thing, the constant shifting thing, was just so attractive to me when I was younger, and I guess, you know, there's still just it's indicative of maybe a short attention span.
For me, it was.
Yeah. But now I'm like, but then it's, in a way, it is ironic that my favorite film from a very early age, because I was 6 years old when I saw 2001, and you know, and that album, it's an album of the eyes, that movie, you know, is like, a lot of people can't hang with that movie because it requires that you like are cool with watching a 17-minute docking sequence, you know, or just it takes its time, you know, and that's kind of the point of the thing is how languid it is, and when it stays in each one of these different settings, and
the soundtrack,
beautiful. On the soundtrack, and obviously there are times where the soundtrack is what is providing the contrast to a very still setup, but it's absolutely transformative and transportational. You know, that when I was in and I saw that movie on a huge screen when I was a kid, you know, curving around me. That was as immersive. That was virtual reality in 1968. I absolutely felt like I was in space watching that movie, and no other sort of thing taking place in space since then has that I've seen has put me in that place quite so much. So from early on, I demonstrated an ability to be absolutely you know, transported by a thing that wasn't doing that constant switch up from thing to thing to thing. But I guess it was few and far between, and there was something about just Kubrick's palette and his choices that just worked for me, you know, and it's clear in every one of his films. So, but you know, then I just became a prog head when I was, you know, from the time that I was like 9 years old, and I heard Tarkus, and that you know, was a catalyst for me. And then a few years later it was Gentle Giant, and, you know, obviously Zappa, and just all this stuff. You get like meditative sequences in a piece like Close to the Edge, but it's you know, surrounded by all this tumult, and so at that point in 1972, I might not wanted to listen to 18 minutes of the pastoral section of Close to the Edge, but I was totally ready for the whole thing.
Well, I always call that weights and measures. It's a study of contrast, and that you have to understand percentages in a way as a composer. You know, I call the middle section, Nels Cline and I think have this thing. I don't know if he came up with it first or I did. We call that the drip section. So
drip.
When you get to the drip section, before I get up, I get down. You know, how long are you going to wait? And I'm going to really geek out here with you for a second. But when I bought the shows from '72 box, the Yes performing Close to the Edge for the first time live, it fascinated me that the three parts where the tape loops appear, the beginning, the middle, and the end, that those actually were improvised upon in that first tour, particularly the second and the third appearances of the tape loop.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a cool idea. They eventually kind of didn't do that much of it, you know.
Things inevitably get codified when you're on big tours, but yeah, that was a beautiful tour, and that box is great.
And Anderson would sing improvising lines in the first loop section, so that struck me. But I guess I wanted to share with you too that I had this 1968 experience, and I'm a little bit, I think, a couple years younger than you. So in 1968, Planet of the Apes came out.
Oh God, that was a huge one, yeah.
Hard to believe that 2001 and Planet of the Apes exist in the same span of months. But my mom, thinking it was a nature documentary, and I love her for this, and I still thank her for this, but we went, and that world changed my life, and that Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack changed my life.
That's a top 3 soundtrack, man.
Top 3, right? So it might be my one, but but imagine, I was not even 5 yet.
Yeah.
Does that not explain all of my damage?
It definitely's got to take some credit.
Well, you know, all of the percussion and the exotic percussion and the electronic processing of harps and pianos and things, and
I just that and Taxi Driver are like the most brutal use of harp.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So Planet of the Apes became, you know, a thing for me, and almost like a mission to say to people, do you want to hear what music from another world sounds like? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just that.
Although, is it really another world?
Turns out we don't know, but yeah, we know. Yeah. So that, I think that and seeing Fantasia, which had the Spring Rounds movement section from Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, where the dinosaurs are dying. And I remember freaking out. It was shown, I think, at my father's school where he was teaching art, and we went, and when the dinosaurs started dying during that section with that music, I completely freaked out and was just screaming, and I had to be removed from the event. Wow.
Well, that definitely ain't that's not a kid's movie.
Fantasia. Well, Fantasia,
yeah.
You know, Fantasia could be considered, I mean, certainly that was very adult. And you raise a kid loving to name all the dinosaurs, and then you show them all the dinosaurs
dying with that music happening. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah,
but
they weren't going easy on the kids.
no, but again, you know, that kind of early experience where you're not prepared and you're not shielded, and there are going to be things that happen to you that they're going to have an impact. You can't control everything.
Yeah,
I kind of
that's
love
an important
that.
lesson. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's funny because the culture of Disney is like, if you go to a theme park, it's everything is engineered for max comfort, right? It's like there's all sorts of things happening psychologically there to pacify you. But all those early Disney films were traumatic to the max. There was usually at
right.
least one scene where something horrible has happened, and not only were kids not shielded from it, every kid in the country was expected to go and see that movie, and everyone was going to go through that.
Yeah, you're going to
So
see Bambi's mom get killed. You're going to
you're
see.
going to see Old Yeller get shot. All of this stuff. It's like kids were not being shielded at all. And yet Disney eventually became synonymous with this sort of white bread thing. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. So I thought it would be fun to ask you about your XTC favorites. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but do you have any particular songs that you love by XTC? Because I know we share this unabiding love for that body of music.
Well, I mean, as soon as you said favorite, I just saw the cover of Black Sea. I really love Black Sea, and that might be, of all the albums, the one that like hits the sweet spot, dead center for me. And certainly on that album, No Language in Our Lungs stands out. I think that's a perfect song. But I really kind of love everything on that album. But I also I tend to like want to defend certain albums. Like, I think The Big Express doesn't get the respect it deserves.
Yes, yes, I'm with you, brother.
Yeah, I truly love that album.
Preach.
And yeah, I mean, it's obviously very dense, and I think people can, but I it's like, to me, that album is not a victim of '80s production,
No.
The way a lot of albums of the era are. And I think some people maybe kind of thoughtlessly will say, oh, that's got all the '80s, Lindrum on it and stuff. No, there are ways to use that technology in a creative way that supports the point of the song. And
if you have the ear.
That's a dense, clangorous, beef hearty album, and I think it's every sonic choice on that album makes sense to me in the context of what those songs are, and I love how layered it is.
The drum opening on Pretty Girls.
Yeah.
If
great.
You're going to tell me that there's a demo of how to use the Lindrum effectively, I would say it's Big Express. But the guy who's running it has to really understand and love drums the way Andy does.
Yeah, absolutely. And precisely. And it's like, what can we do to make this machine feel something like Drumbo?
Well, isn't that the same time period where he did Ella Guru and programmed?
He did Ella Guru. Well, that was, I'd say that was between Big Express and Oranges and Lemon. But there's just so much fantastic writing on Big Express. I think Train Running Low on Soul Call is one of the most powerful album closers ever.
Red Brick Dream.
And then what's the da-dum, da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, is that Lazy Bird? Is that the name of that song?
Lady Bird?
Lady Bird. Yeah.
Lady Bird is on Mummer.
That's on Mummer, right. Yeah.
Ba-dum,
That's right. That's on side 2 of Mummer. Well, I love that too. And even Mummer is an album that I think doesn't get the accolades it earns. There's a lot of incredibly wonderful stuff on Mummer.
Love Mummer. Mummer.
Both of those records. That, to me, that's like a primo period. I like both those albums more than English Settlement. I remember thinking that English Settlement felt a little half-baked to me. Like, there's a number of songs on English Settlement that feel like damn good demos to me. Now, when do we get the finished song? And Mummer feels, more fully baked, and Big Express feels really fully baked. And I just love just like such incredible, Shake You Donkey Up. It's just so nasty.
That's a killer.
It's like,
that's a killer.
Yeah. It's and you get to like later albums like Oranges and Lemons, which I love, and I was there for part of the making of that album, and then Wasp Star, which is also gets some some noisy clangorous stuff, but it was refined to that point where it felt like some of the danger had been taken away. Big Express, it's like there's such velocity to the songs on Big Express. It feels like it's simultaneously refined and still just about to spin out of control. The guitar playing on Big Express, I think, is the closest that Andy ever got to like that Magic Band kind of dream world. With the possible exception of Drums and Wires, which is my other great favorite. I think Drums and Wires is an incredible bunch of songs, and the energy of that record, the first record with Dave Gregory, is real powerful. And then that's an album where I think, as much as I love the original mix, and I love the fact that album was like mastered quietly, I always found like that when I put on Drums and Wires, I had to turn it up, and that brought me closer to the music that way. But that's an album that I think Steven Wilson's remix was a total home run. And there are I don't necessarily think that every album that Steven Wilson has remixed was an improvement over what came before. But I do think that in certain cases, Topographic Oceans being one, I think that the original mix of Topographic Oceans is kind of anodyne and wan, and that those are two fine words. They are good descriptors.
Well, it benefited Squire greatly to have that remixed. I think
and Alan as well. I everything, honestly. I feel like when I listened to Steven's remix of Topographic Oceans, it brought me into that music in a way that the original mix never did. And I feel the same way about his Skylarking mix, and I feel the same way about his Drums and Wires mix, even though I wouldn't say that Drums and Wires remix brought me into the music any more than I already was, because I love the original mix, but I also love Steven's mix. I think that he did lovely things with those tracks.
Drums and Wires and Black Sea for a Drummer are just heaven.
And it's funny because it's like you hear stories about Terry Chambers claiming that he barely considered himself a drummer, that like when he when it was time to do the next project, he would have to remember how to set up his kit. But I just think that he had a real pure connection to the sound of it, Once he got behind the drums, he just did it right,
Terry Chambers is one of the unsung heroes of rock drumming. Sorry, if you can't get to Terry Chambers, then you're not going to be able to get to the subsequent, Bruford playing linear parts, or Steve Jansen in Japan playing linear parts. I think
not to mention In the Air Tonight.
Well, exactly. So that whole drum sound now that has been opened up, we want all the overtones. We want concussion. We want, to feel the drums.
Yeah,
and just while we're on the subject,
Black Sea is the laboratory for that stuff.
And Black Sea, I was going to say, for me, Travels in Neolon.
Ooh, yeah.
Which to me is like, that's on a pop record? Good luck,
I know. Yeah.
That is stunning to me, that they had the balls to do that. After, obviously they're smart enough to leave it for the end, but you're not going to want to follow.
On the previous record, Complicated Game is sort of the same kind of uncompromised thing. It's just like we're just going to do exactly what we want here.
I was just going to say, those two sign-offs are two of the greatest choices for final songs on an album, which is you're not going to follow that with anything. We're done.
No.
But I do want to make special mention of a real sleeper, if you will, which is for me Somnambulist.
Oh wow! Well, nicely put. Yeah, and that's a very lovely minimalist thing, and Andy, alone with 4 tracks and some kind of weird Korg synthesizer is a good time.
Oh, I think there's Obi on that too.
What's that?
I think there's Oberheim on that as well.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I like all the weird, the Homo Safari instrumentals from that era, and the odd, just strange little experiments that would pop up on B-sides. And then Take Away the Lure of Salvage is a great remix album. It's just like such, and that stuff was delightful for me at the time, because I didn't get into XTC until I'd seen Senses Working Overtime on MTV. That was the trigger for me. And of course, at that point, there were already 5 albums available and all these EPs and singles with B-sides and Take Away Lure Salvage and all this stuff to discover. And it's like every weekend I would go to the record store and do another scouring and find some more XTC stuff to bring home. So everything up until Mummer I discovered simultaneously, and that was like a really, really rich, wonderful thing. But then, Snowman, it might be my favorite song on English Settlement. That's another perfect song. It is. They definitely had a sense for what to end things with, because Chalk Hills and Children is one of the most amazing things as well. It's like just some great sign-off tunes on those records. Well,
it's the lesson that we can learn from groups like XTC of what do you start to get people's attention? How do you start? Mm-hmm. And what do you leave them with?
Yeah.
And I preach that all the time when I'm working on someone else's production, but certainly on my own, which is, you got to realize those are 2 super important moments.
Yeah.
The moment where you first shake hands with people and say hello, as you have, and just the idea of welcome to this world.
Right.
And then how are we going to say goodbye, at the end? And sometimes there's a fade out, which I always loved, judicious use of fade out, because I agreed with Stockhausen's take on it, which was a fade out would indicate that the music is continuing somewhere. It's just kind of going off into the distance for the moment, and you can re-encounter it. So I like that very much.
When it's used purposefully, it's a great tool, and I've done very little of it on my records.
Me too, yeah.
But I've tried to make them count when I do.
You have to.
Yeah. You can't just go, well, we got no other way to end this. That can't be the reason for a fade out, because you couldn't think of a better way to end it.
Right. No, I think the fade out is the idea of Stockhausen would say the piece opens and the piece closes, but it's still in there doing its thing musically,
Yeah.
It's a universe existing inside of itself. We could go on and on about XTC, but I want to flip back to your stuff. Okay. I have a list, but I'm not going to go through the whole list. It would take too long. But let's do a lightning round of me asking you what the hell these titles mean to you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, right. If possible. I'm not asking you to reveal too much, but I just thought it would be fun.
Right.
5 Legs?
5 Legs, that was... that's a specific response, and for reasons I don't really remember, to the song 3 Legs on Ram by Paul McCartney. And whereas 3 legs is 1 leg too few, 5 legs is like 1 leg too many. And I think I probably named it before I had those words, which are bizarre in the extreme. It was I think it was just a response to that guitar part, and for some reason it put me in mind of that McCartney tune. But
the lyrics are nonsense lyrics, correct?
The lyrics are speaking in tongues. The lyrics showed up while I think I was shaving and looking myself in the mirror, and all of a sudden this, sing tight, move tight, Apollo chord to the movement of steam. They all sort of tumbled out at one time. It was one of those things where you feel like you're getting a message from somewhere and you're just receiving it. So,
and it's a good example of words that sound good together.
They did feel like they belonged together, even though, what is Apollo chord to the movement of steam? But by the time, and I imagined it being like, it's almost like you know, some guys down at the bottom of a ship that are being forced to row. You know, when I hear that apple core to the movement of Steve, that kind of rhythm, it's that's yeah. I didn't question it, and that's what ended up being the song. And those lyrics don't have any specific relation to the title Five Legs, but as in most working titles, they're real hard to shake.
Right.
Very often the working title insists on saying, just because any other title you care to think of feels like you're forcing the matter.
How about Nanny Ass Crow?
That is, you know, again, we're in Wood and Smoke, right? Which at the time I remember feeling that conventional lyric writing was not, I wasn't able to get to the stuff that I was feeling. So I was searching for words that conveyed how I was feeling and worked musically with the musical settings I was coming up with. So Nanny Ass Crow, I just thought was an evocative phrase. It sounded like it might be some obscure form of bird, even though it's not. There is no such actual bird called the Nanny Ass Crow, but it struck me that there could be. But again, that came out around the same era as the Five Legs lyrics, when it was just a strange group of words, which in this case was Nanny Ass Crow, you won't see comet crepe eat tonight, and you comet crepe, which was the name of a comet. You're not going to see it. Tonight, which is the electronic version of tonight, in the way that email is the electronic version of mail. It's, you know, very bizarre, very arcane stuff. You know, just like weird, the type of stuff that normally you wouldn't even like share with somebody else, that you've had these thoughts.
But this is something that I appreciated always about your music, was almost in a Todd-like way. It's so personal that you just go with it. And, you know, I never thought, well, this guy's out of his mind. I thought this guy's having fun. And
well, that's really it. And to the extent that I'm out of my mind, it's, you know, I think all of us have these weird kind of thoughts, but probably don't go as far as to put them on a record. But they just feel like honest expressions, so why not? You know,
I'm with you. I mean, on my first percussion album, Definite Pitch, there's a piece dedicated to Jamie Muir, which is a fully notated keyboard percussion piece, xylophone, marimba, and vibraphone, called Flazier. And Flazier was a word that came to me in a dream.
Yeah, there's a lot of dream junk on my records as well, and sometimes because that's when you feel like you've got the purest connection to your own, you know, consciousness and your own processes. It's
Agreed.
Not being filtered by anything, you know, and you've experienced this undoubtedly, where you hear the most angelic music while you're sleeping that you wish you could remember when you woke up, because you feel like that's the thing I've been trying to do for 30 years. And by the time you get into the process of creating actual music, there's all these distractions and technological, you know, necessities that you have to go through, but that they get in the way of that pure thing. So I won't be satisfied until we figure out how to get that direct MIDI link. You know, it's like I'm still waiting.
I have entire albums where I kept a recorder next to the bed, and I sang the stuff into the recorder, and that was where all the parts were. So I actually would transcribe my vocalization coming out of a dream after, and it was as close as I've gotten, but it's hard. It's difficult.
It is hard, but that's a real, extremely valid approach.
But also there was another one that I had that I did a piece called "The Meal Player in His Livelier Days."
The Neil player?
The meal player in
Okay.
his livelier days.
In his livelier days.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was a free jazz piece, and I just seemed really appropriate for that particular piece. And it wasn't a piece that I heard. It was a phrase that a guy was reading from a book, and he was listing things. It's things like, and the gentleman on the street, and the woman in the corner brushing her hair, the meal player in his livelier days. This
It
imprint
does. It's
forever in my mind, you know.
a very striking phrase. You were right to capture it.
How about I'm glad there's lemon freshened thorax in you? What the hell is that one?
That's just a dumb pun on from a commercial of my youth. What was it that had borax in it? Was it Fab? Oh, Fab, we're
Thorax.
glad there's lemon fresh and borax in you. That was a commercial jingle in the 60s. It must have been Fab, because that's the closest
Fab,
thing
yeah.
to a detergent I can think of that rhymes with glad, and that's the internal rhyme there. Oh, Fab, I'm glad there's lemon fresh and borax in you. So that was just, I just changed borax to thorax, so Fab wouldn't sue. And,
How about deep fried skinks or go?
just a weird phrase. I had all those links on that album. There's like those are names for like tiny little 5-6 second links that are on Dustback, and they just needed names since they had track assignments. And I remember not thinking it. I knew that there were a lot of animals on the album, and so I just kind of wanted to add to the menagerie, because there's skunk on Dustback and there's dolphins on Dustback. So I just thought I would add skinks into the mix, and I don't know why I deep fried the poor little things. And Argo, that's the cats, Thundercats Argo. Yeah, and I always thought, what a weird phraseology to say that anything is go. So part of my method there is let's just take a completely absurd thing and imbue it with this significance by claiming that it is go. So, the most absurd object that I could think of in that moment was a deep fried skink. So I was like, yeah, deep fried skinks are go. Just a weird, dumb, pointless thing to say.
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of pointless things.
yes. Well, and we make them pointful.
Like Eno and the Actor on the first album. It's like, a lot of people said, is that based on a true story? And it's like, well, how could it be? Nothing happens in that song.
Right.
And the actor meet in a restaurant, and the dog walks in the room, and the to me, the joy of it was to take this completely fake, meaningless thing, and by treating it with a certain amount of solemnity and an orchestrational hoo-ha, make it feel as though something just happened there, even though it didn't.
Yeah, I love the irrational, and I think the irrational in art was an article that I read in college that I think had a big influence. I'm trying to think who wrote it, but it had a lot to do with what is surrealism, and what are we tapping into when we have nonsense. And if you're a creative type, I think sense becomes boring, or making things make sense, after a certain.
It definitely feels limiting, and I've struggled with that, and when I go back and listen to some of my earlier lyrics in particular, and there's just a freewheeling quality to it that I'm like envious of now, because it's real hard for me to write lyrics now. And I think that maybe the way to unlock that is to just go back to the way I was attempting to unlock it on Wooden Smoke and Dog was by writing words that weren't even actual words. There's a lot of that, and there's a song on Dog called Gravity Grab. That's a real bizarre one, and there's a lot of words in that song that aren't actual words. And that was an attempt to get at something, because I wasn't able to get at it using actual lyrics. And some people might say that that's just laziness, but my hope was to arrive somewhere that I couldn't get through conventional means. And then that's when I started between Dog and Scambot. There's like a 5-year span there, and I was barely writing any songs at all. So Scambot was my attempt to get back into songwriting and using conventional words, but what I had there to keep me going was the plot line. And call back to your question an hour and a half ago about what Scambot is about. That plot line was really devised to get me back into the world of songwriting. Since I was finding it hard to write lyrics, I needed a concept to bring me along. And what I was, grateful to find is that in the process of having a storyline, I was writing lyrics that were just sort of tangentially related to the storyline that I felt stood alone. Like Hallmark, for instance, or various other songs that I do think stand alone as a song and not just as a piece of a narrative puzzle. And then the next writing I was doing was with Andy Partridge for Wingbeat, and I was able to take a bit of a backseat on a lot of those songs because I had the world's greatest lyricist with me, so that made it easier. But it also made me need to up my game the next time I was getting back into writing lyrics again. And so for Scambot 2, a lot of the songs there, I was trying to take some of what I had learned from Andy, not necessarily learned, but what I felt I had gleaned just from being in the room with him while he was doing this, spinning his magic. But it's just hard. The more songs you write to like get back to that place, it's impossible to get back to the place of just innocence and just like joy that I had when I was like working on the stuff that became Hat. I just really felt free, and I think that Hat really reflects that. That's an album that just feels like which is what it was, just a guy who was just so delighted by all the possibilities, and it's giddy. Like that's a giddy album with all the possibilities, and all those possibilities still exist. It's just that once you've written a few hundred songs, it's and especially when, as I'm like really conscious of not repeating myself. I get upset with myself if I feel like I'm doing something that feels too much like something I've done before.
Yeah.
But everybody's got their thing. Everybody's got their note, that their sound, their voice. So to some degree, that's inevitable, and you gotta. At least I find that I'm trying to give myself a break about that. And now that I've got a studio here at home, and I'm like working on finishing a record, but at the same time I'm working on other people's projects, so I can't focus all my time on finishing my record, and I'm like very eager to get back to my record and finish it so that I can move on to what the next stuff I'm going to do is. And I'm thinking that the next stuff I'm going to do is not going to necessarily be tied to album releases. I want to use Bandcamp as a means to just put my stuff out as it's happening. Maybe at some point, once I've got enough of it, start collecting them onto albums if people want it that way. But what excites me now is to just make songs without thinking about it at all. Not thinking about its place in a running order or about trying to do anything in particular. I just want to make songs. And from the most arduous and unwished for circumstances, which is this pandemic, it's brought me to a place where I for the first time have recording gear at home, in my home, that I think I can without guilt put out finished work, because I think technology has developed to the point where you can have relatively few components and put out nice sounding work. So I'm very eager to get to that stage.
And you've also and you've now have a Patreon thing going, right?
Yeah, which is, for a touring musician who is unable to tour, and for many years that touring has absolutely formed the bedrock component of my livelihood. Patreon is a possibility for like just using my work, both existing work and work to come, as a means to generate income, and also to service a very specific group of people who are only there interested in your, as opposed to making a post on Facebook or something like that where you are doing battle with all everything that's on Facebook, and political noise and all this ugliness and stuff, and in the midst of all that, you post something and say, check this out, you know, and it's like you're really doing battle to do that. Whereas everybody who has graciously subscribed to my Patreon account, if when I post something on Patreon, whether it be a you know a video or a piece of writing about some music that I'm working on now, or something from the archives, I've been posting songs and you know, drawings. I posted the original Scambot comic strip on Patreon a few weeks ago. My rehearsal notes from the Zappa tour, everything that we played at Soundcheck, I found those notes. I've been posting those, you know, a few pages at a time, along with writing about them and, you know, what we were going through that day. Did we really think we were going to play Last Train to Clarksville? Well, I don't think we, you know, we did run it at Soundcheck, you know, so it's like stuff like that.
With Frank?
So it's just, yeah, we would find the right cover songs to play. He was into, you know, and eventually he settled on those Beatle tunes, and like we did Purple Haze and Sunshine of Your Love, and course of like you know, deciding that those were the cover tunes that he wanted to play, we ran through Shapes of Things and Last Train to Clarksville and Taxman and, you know, all these weird you know, covers that we would just like play, and then Frank would see if there was any promise. And so I got all notes posted at Patreon, and, you know, drawings and all kinds of stuff. So it's just a means for me to be able to go, and it's endless, you know, because I have archives, I have, you know, boxes and boxes of stuff that I can post, and unreleased audio. Like there was this I did a gig in 2005 with, it was the first time I played with Marco Miniman and Brian Beller and violinist, one of the violinists from the Metropole Orchestra, which is his name is Herman von Haren, and we did a quartet gig at the Paradiso, which was, you know, in my mind this was like my Star Lesson Bible Black Band. You know, it was guitar, bass, drums, and violin, and I had written violin arrangements for a bunch of my songs, all of the craziest, hardest stuff to play. And I wrote drum tracks for Marco, and I remember going to the rehearsal, maybe the only rehearsal with these guys, and Brian looking at me like I was insane because he hadn't heard Marco play and he didn't know anything about Marco's work, and he's like, "What? You're just gonna we're gonna play Ugly Town and Dolphins and you know, all this crazy stuff with one rehearsal? You know, what is this guy, some kind of superhuman?" And I'm just like, "Well, you'll see." And then we got to rehearsal, and Marco knew the stuff better than we did, you know, and gig was outrageous. So the morning after the Paradiso gig, we did a radio session that I had completely forgotten about until I found the CD a few weeks ago, and I listened to it, and it's like, this is really good, and it's like a completely different look at my stuff, because it's you know, an unusual instrumentation. It's violin, guitar, bass, and drums, and the particular mix of this radio performance is like, doesn't sound like anything else I've ever done. So I've been posting songs from this radio performance at Patreon. So it's just like, and it's sort of like a box set that doesn't stop, you know. So I'm going to be posting stuff to Patreon for the rest of my life because I really like it as a platform. And then the other thing I've been doing in recent weeks, which has been really fun, is that I have all the multi-tracks from all of my albums that were recorded on analog tape, and some of the ones that were, you know, recorded on digital. I have them here. So I have, you know, digital files of all the analog multi-tracks from Hat and Dustback and Sluggo, Dancing and Windsmoke and all that stuff. So over the last few weeks, I've been having the get-togethers just for Patreon, where I go through the files, and I can go through, you know, the songs from Hat, and so far it's just been Hat and Dustback because I'm going chronologically. Where I, you know, just like you do when you get the multi-track stuff, you can mute things, you can solo things, and just like discover what really lives in all these tracks. You know, I was listening to Doug's bass tracks, you know, soloed on all this stuff, and then, you know, there's some alternate takes there that never made it to, you know, other material that didn't make it to the final album. So. And the other thing that's cool is that if you join the Patreon, you can register for these chats. So even though they've already happened, they're archived. So if you can, even the ones that I've already done, you can still watch. So I think for people who are interested in me, it's something that they should check out. And the other thing that I'm doing, which not everyone does at Patreon, but I think is the way to do it, for me anyway, is the kind of the standard thing on Patreon is that there are different tiers, right? There are different amounts that you can pay in order to have access to stuff. And generally, the higher monetary tiers, you have access to more stuff. But the way I prefer to do it is to make all the stuff available to everyone from the tier to the second to the highest tier. There's 5 tiers in total. The very highest tier gets you one-on-one time with me, a certain amount of time with me every month to work on your music. But all the other tiers, you get all the same stuff, access to all the same material, and it's just about how much you feel you want to support me. You know, it's so then that's a beautiful thing, right? If somebody decides that they want to support me at the larger level, if they're able to do, then that's a choice that they make, and that's so it's like right now it's very important to me that this exists because I'm not touring, so that's but what it's about is not it's not supporting my lifestyle. It's about putting out stuff that I think people are going to enjoy. So it would be cool for people to check it out if they'd like to.
Yeah, and we're going to have a link to Mike's Patreon at the out credits of this episode. So look for it there, and you can
thank you
dig into all of the coolness that is Mr. Keneally.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Greg.
Mike, I feel like we could go on and on. We've been at this now for about 2 hours.
Wow, time does fly.
Time flies.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you if you have a favorite Zappa memory before we split.
Oh man.
I know it's a hard question. But
it is. But I'm this inevitably comes up, and I find myself reluctant to share it because it feels self-aggrandizing. But it's a thing that really stuck with me and allowed me. It offered comfort at times in my life when I really needed it, and it was a sound check where, because I got a reputation, like I wasn't a great reader or anything, so the where I kind of held my water in the Zappa band was the fact that I had a lot of his material committed to memory because I loved it so much. So it was a sort of thing where, like, he might say at rehearsal one day, I think I'd like to try Who Needs the Peace Corps. That would be a fun one to play. And then he would just turn and look at me and wait for me to start playing it. And then we could build the arrangement out of my knowledge of the song because he didn't have any charts around. So, some of those arrangements for some of those songs were kind of were an outgrowth of my knowledge of the song. So I was grateful to be there for that reason, that I could bring a song, Peace Corps, back into the repertoire after 20 years. That was cool. I felt like I was really earning my spot there. But then sometimes he would catch me with a tune that I didn't have ready to go right away. And at one sound check on the road, he goes, "Oh, I think I'd like to do Can't Afford No Shoes." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." And again, he just turned and looked at me, and he's like, "Okay, play it." And I'm like, "Okay." So I played the whole front part of the song. Is easy, right? And then it gets to the I guess is the chorus. Well, hey, Lordy Mama, can't afford no shoes. Maybe there's a bundle of bags I could use for everybody. Rags, not bags. And that, there's a specific formula to those modulating chords, but I'd never played the song before. I was just grabbing it out of my knowledge from having listened to the record a million times. And up to that part of the song, it was easy enough to do because the leaps were not that unconventional. But once we got to that bridge or chorus, I hadn't yet decoded the way that all those chord changes work. So they modulate all over the place. So I fucked it up. I'm trying to play it, and I'm like, no, that's not it. Oh, no. And so immediately everybody in the band starts razzing me. And Ed Mann gets on his mic. He's going like, "Encyclopedia failure, encyclopedia failure," and Frank was making fun of me, and everybody was making fun of me, and I'm like, you turn into Beaver Cleaver at those moments. It's like, oh shucks, guys, that kind of thing. So they had their moment of making fun of me, and it was fine. And then at the end of the rehearsal, Frank was walking behind me as he was walking off stage, and this was so uncharacteristic of him to say something this sweet and supportive, but he got real close and he just whispered, "You're the best new guy I ever had in the band." And then he kept walking, and I'm reluctant to bring it up, like I say, because it's first of all, it's a personal thing, and it was a whispered comment, so there's a part of me that feels like maybe I shouldn't even share that, although I have in the past. But I can't deny it, that's like a moment that meant so much to me. Like I must have looked somewhat wounded, that and he felt like it, but that was a sweet thing for him to do, and I think it's like it runs counter to a lot of people's image of him as a guy who just like is only cynical, and I think that showed a real sweetness and concern, and also it just made me feel so validated, because I was in and he made the point of saying new guy, because that's a different thing from just a guy in the band. But I think what he meant by that was just like somebody who just arrived and found their place. So that was this was my first professional gig, so that was in itself a very daunting thing. But I started my pro music career with the dream gig, because that's all I wanted when I was growing up, was to play with Frank Zappa, and that's where I started my career. So that in itself is insane, and I definitely had moments of self-doubt and just feeling like I was barely getting by. So to get that degree of support and validation from Frank was so important to me. And as I say, there have been times in life where being able to remember that, think back on that moment was extremely helpful. Because if somebody who was as important to me as Frank, if he could feel that way, even if you felt that way in that moment, it meant a lot. It still means a lot.
That's beautiful, Mike. And clearly he did appreciate the fact that you had so much of his stuff under your belt when you came in, that you did deserve to be there. And I'm sure he knew you were batting 900 anyway. I mean, there might be one, it's like stump the band member.
That's basically what it was. That was precisely what it was. And and I never, even though the sort of folk tale that has arisen is that I had, that I knew. Somebody said to me once, "Is it true that you know how to play every Frank Zappa song backwards and forwards?" Like he meant it literally, that I could actually play each song backwards. And I'm like, I can't even play every song perfectly forwards. The only claim I ever made to Frank was that I was familiar with all of his material, which is true because I listened to his stuff obsessively. And that if you name a song, I will give you some kind of a rendition of it in the moment. And then if you give me some time, like if I can go home and come back tomorrow, I'll have it ready for you. But, it's like it wasn't a thing where I was like some kind of computer that could play every song perfectly, and I never made that claim. But that rumor made the rounds, but it's not the way.
Well, it's like, wouldn't you want a guy that knew all of your stuff to come in?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's why I was in the band. I wasn't the kind of slick musician that was like give you, I listened to, I was barely a guitar player at all. I was like, I played guitar for fun. I was trained as a keyboard player. I never had any guitar lessons. So in the fact that the guy who had previously held that position of stunt guitarist was Steve Vai, who's like the model of a trained guitar player who has studied and can transcribe the stuff and all this stuff, and in contrast, I was very much a garage guitar player. It just so happens that I loved Frank's music, and one of the ways that I trained myself to play the more intricate stuff that I wanted to play was to learn Frank's music and play it to the best of my ability. So I was playing, you know, I've learned Sinister Footwear too, how to play on guitar because I loved that melody so much. That didn't necessarily mean I had it right because I was learning it off of a cassette recording. Even before it came out on a record, I learned it off of my taped off the radio cassette off of the Halloween 1981 gig. And
Well,
so oh, by the way, the Halloween 81 box that's about to come out is fantastic. My approach to Frank's music guitar wise was not very slick. You know, it was very on the edges. So ridiculous that I had that gig. But it was my love of the music and my ability to call it up to mind, which I think in some ways I benefited from the fact that I wasn't a trained musician where I received music through my eyes as opposed to my ears. I wasn't a great reader, so the way I internalized music was just from hearing it. So I developed an ear early on, and I think that it was that ear that was as important to Frank as anything else that I had to offer. You know, in terms of chops, I was just doing my best to keep up.
you had a chop.
And I mean, it's like 3 years later, I got to do the Zappa's Universe shows, and I had developed my chops more to a degree. And I remember when I was doing those shows, thinking, man, I wish I could turn back, do that tour again. And then even more recently, doing the shows with the Zappa band, and obviously this summer we were supposed to be out on the road opening for King Crimson, and which has been postponed precisely 1 year. So hopefully next summer we'll be out doing that. And again, it's like 30 years have gone by more, and it's a beautiful opportunity to revisit that music with the guys that I love, and just try to feel like, because I love those songs so much, I really want to honor them, and sometimes you just need to have a few years under your belt in order to do that.
Well, it's a beautiful project, and the band plays Zappa's music so beautifully. And I think it's important that music be played by the people who love it. I mean, that's how I ended up playing with Todd Rundgren, because, I had a whole lifetime of loving his music and knowing it without having to think about it. So when I said to him, if you ever need a drummer who knows your catalog, and I, you mean it, and you're offering that.
Right.
You're offering that really as a very respectful and joyful thing. It's like, yeah, you could start playing any of your songs and I'll be able to jump in. I mean, also he doesn't like to rehearse, and you can understand that. But I had heard somewhere that.
It's.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, that's obviously an attractive thing to any band leader, to have somebody in the band who's just like good to go. Yeah, name a tune. That's extremely helpful.
Yes, I like to be helpful. and certainly it was always fun when you would call me up when you and Rick were playing duets and said, let's play DNA, or let's play Haugseth, or any of those songs. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm grateful that you're there and have that stuff ready.
Are you in touch with Todd about doing something? I'd heard.
It's on me. The ball's in my court right now, and I've been so distracted with other projects that I haven't been able to complete my writing work. But basically, we're collaborating on this stage presentation, and the methodology is for me to compose a bunch of themes based on sort of like stage instructions in this treatment that he's written. There are several points in the treatment where a kind of song is described. So I've in first drafts for 9 of them, and I've still got another 8 to do, but I want to revise them all as well. And it's an interesting thing about this period in history we're in right now. Seemingly there would be an unlimited amount of time to do projects of this nature, but the reality is that when you set up an environment where projects can transpire, projects transpire. And in addition to me trying to get my own album finished, I've gotten involved in a number, and others have requested that I do certain things that are time intensive, unlike this project with Todd, which is basically taking place on its own time frame. But having said that, I'm taking a long time to finish my work, and I would like to complete it, get it into Todd's hands, because basically Todd is going to take the stuff that I do and manipulate that. So it won't be, he won't, musically, he's all created this very elaborate narrative. So he did the first huge step by creating that document. But he won't take the next step musically until I complete all my work. He said his preferred approach was for me to proclaim myself satisfied with all of my work, and then he would take the next step from there. And I'm not yet at that. I'm probably 25% of the way towards total satisfaction. So that's it. It's on my list of things that I have to do. But also, there's no one's going to be mounting any new stage presentations anytime soon anyway. So I'm comforting myself with the notion that it'll happen when it's meant to.
That sounds like a very cool project. But speaking of cool
it's very
projects,
cool.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of cool projects where people collaborate in different ways, I just finished doing a bunch of xylophone and vibraphone and tuned percussion tracks for something that you and I have been collaborating on.
I'm so happy about this. You did amazing, man. It's such a cool piece, and it's going on the next record. It's called Apricot, and it was a thing that we started at John Wood's studio in Santa Monica in 2003, I think, and we 2002. And we went in and we improvised a bunch of stuff. On half of it I played guitar, and on half of it I played bass, and it was just the two of us. And then what I had forgotten was somewhere in the intervening time, I had done some overdubs on one of them, and it was just like the beginning. So it's like I did most of the work in the first part of the piece, and then as it goes looser, and then I did some editing on and just sent it to you, and then you went off and you did so many cool overdubs on it, and it's just turned into this beautiful, colorful track. And I'm going to do more overdubs on that. And right now I see it as because I want to do vinyl on this next album. So this is like the opening side 4, which I think is a really good spot for it. And I'm just so freaking pleased that you're a part of the album, and that the stuff you did is just like so happening. It's like this beautiful melody that you wrote for the head, and this is great. It's great. I think it's a lovely collaboration. I'm super jazzed about it. I mean, when I heard it, you sent it to me just like a week ago or something. I was over the moon. I was like yelling.
That's just so wonderful to hear, because I was, so into it, having so much fun, and I was kind of channeling Giant and channeling Frank, and also Interzone, and just sort of looking at what would Mike think was fun on this, and let's have some fun, and I was able to really orchestrate the percussion parts. And so the whole first half is all tuned percussion pretty much, and the second half is all untuned percussion and noisemakers and things. So it's kind of like a medley of 2 songs.
It is, and in fact, I might actually end up changing the title and turn it into 2 distinct titles. But it's cool because I still have more overdubs to do on it, and my overdubs are going to be so radically influenced by the stuff that you did, and it's just It's a really good collaboration, and kind of like the most intensive composerly collaboration that you and I have done, and I'm very jazzed about it from that angle too. I think it's neat to get both of our compositional voices on there in that way.
Yeah, it's a co-write.
Absolutely.
What's the album going to be called?
I need to get your publishing stuff. That?
What's the album going to be?
That? Yeah, let's say I don't think I have revealed the title yet, so I'm gonna hang on to it just in case I change my mind. But yeah, I'm gonna keep that my little secret for the moment.
And when will it drop approximately?
I think it's going to come out in March. I was originally thinking it was going to come out later this year, but I just recently got more ambitious with my plans for the album. It's basically going to be twice as long, and you know, kind of designed as a vinyl experience for the first time. It'll, you know, be the first album that I've released that way. So I need that extra time to get the additional tracks done that I'm targeting for the second disc. So March, it'll be out in March. And
who all is going to be on it approximately?
Who's going to be on it? I've got you and Panos and Doug Lunn are on it with 2 tracks that were recorded in 2002, the same era that we started Apricot. Tobias Ralph plays drums on one of the tunes. Malcolm Mortor's on one of the songs. Steve Vai plays on one of the tunes. David Osman from the Firesign Theater is on the record. Chris Myers from Humphreys McGee is on there. Rick Musalam plays on there. There's a couple of from a smaller subset of the Metropole Orchestra that I refer to as the Mini Pole, but with Brian Beller on bass. There's a song on Scambot 1 called Chi, and these are 2 pieces that come from the same session that Chi came from. So it's a kind of a potpourri. It's you know, a lot of material from a lot of different eras, but it's hanging together really nice. It's like it's got a feel to it unlike any of the other records. And what I'm going to do with this extra time is really take the second disc and turn it into kind of its own thing. It's the murder most of this album, you know, to make the connection to the Bob Dylan record. It's like Murder Most is kind of part of the album. So I'm going to use the David Osman narration to kind of turn the second disc into its own beast. I'm really jazzed about it.
I'm super excited to see it all come to fruition, Mike. Being part of anything that you're working on, making music with you has been a highlight of my life, and I love everything that we've done. We've tried so many things. Some of them didn't work. Some have really gone spectacularly, and I love you so much, man, and you and your music have meant so much to me over the last 20 years.
Greg, thank you so much. I love you too, and it's yeah, I'm just as jazzed about other stuff that we can do in the future now that I have some decent recording facilities here. I look forward to future collaborations and someday gigs.
We'll do it, Mike. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat and open up about things. And you know, that's what we're doing here at the ProgCast. I'm trying to get people to share the deepest part of the music, because, you know, promotional interviews can be one thing, but we're doing a different thing here where I know the people that want to go a little bit deeper, that listen to what we're doing, will appreciate it. And so there'll be a lot more to come with that. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And, you know, check out all of Mike's incredible music. As I say, there'll be a link following, and you can tap into his Patreon wealth of creativity. Mike, thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Greg. Thanks. It was a total pleasure. Obviously, I could continue geeking out and talking about. We could have just talked about Gentle Giant for 3 hours. So it always fun, always a good time.
We'll do it another time, though.
All right, you got it.
All right. Okay, Mike.
Right. Take care, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.